something that gets lost, and especially when you're dealing with younger advisors, is it becomes about this benchmark. It becomes about this piece of activity. It becomes about, making the pain stop, whether it's the constant call from your manager or the, lack of income in your paycheck, right? And it gets away from trying to help people. And so what I always tell people is if you're having a tough day or a tough week, go spend some time with your family. And if you don't like your family, go spend some time with your friend's family that you do like, because that's really what it's all about.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSalle here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And I have an old friend of mine that I had met way back in my previous life at Northwestern. And, we had gotten reconnected. Joe actually reminded me that we had met. So I felt a little bit guilty. We had met in passing, probably, 8 or 10 years ago. But today we have Joe Milano, who is the managing partner at New South Wealth Management. And beyond learning about Joe's background and journey today, which he has a pretty interesting and compelling journey from where he started to, where he is now. We're also going to talk and try and emphasize on the impact that you as advisors actually have on people, both from a personal standpoint as well as economically, and also talk about how to actually do that. With that being said, we had talked in our intro call about how sometimes, depending on the platform that an advisor starts in, like we were both at Northwestern, sometimes those companies are a great fit for certain people and other times they're not. And oftentimes people get discouraged and leave the industry when in reality, they could be a great advisor. Perhaps they just need to find a different platform. So those are some of the topics that we're going to unpack today with Joe Milano. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, David. I'm looking forward to it.
So, we had crossed paths back in our Northwestern days, and neither of us are there anymore. And when we were talking, you had kind of gotten into the business, scraped and clawed your way through. I think you mentioned you were an intern to start and you were, banging the phones, making cold calls. And then you fast forward, 15, 16 years and you hit the restart button. So I guess bring us back, to the intern days and kind of walk us through your progression throughout the Northwestern system and then ultimately the transition 15, 16 years later and where you're at now.
That sounds great, Dave. And before I do that, I just want to thank you for having me today. And I want to articulate the importance of your podcast. It's very few places you can gain years of worth of experience within a couple of minutes of listening. And through the Model FA podcast, I think that's what you're delivering. And it's a huge resource and a benefit to people that are, 5, 10 years, maybe even less in the business. So I wish I had something like this. So
I appreciate that.
I think you're doing a great thing here. So thanks again for having me.
Of course.
In regards to the path, just like everybody else that finds himself in this business for 20 plus years, you look back and you're like, how did I get started? And it certainly wasn't the thing I signed up for at my 5th grade career day, So it kind of like everybody else, somebody brought me into the business. So I was a little bit different situation in school. I graduated in 3.5 years. I was struggling to figure out what it is I wanted to do. I always had an entrepreneurial spirit to me. I had a fraternity brother of mine who was a first-year rep at Northwestern Mutual, kind of tell me a little bit about his day-to-day, and he was looking to hire an intern. And so I really needed to beef up my resume. The best accomplishment I had on it at that time was I was graduating school in 3.5 years. There really wasn't much to fill it with. So I started the internship program, and I think about maybe 3, max 4 weeks later, September 11th happened. So I was actually in the office that day and then went back to Villanova where I went and did my undergrad. And growing up in Manhattan and going to high school in Manhattan, you have this connection to the city. And so I didn't really know what I signed up for at Northwestern. And I knew my hometown was going through some turmoil. And what ended up happening was I went back into that office and started seeing, the Northwestern veteran reps call on friends and family and clients and a lot of people that I've known personally. And then ultimately by extension through that internship and some other connections professionally, I saw the impact firsthand on the importance of life insurance and planning for the event of catastrophe, right? Because, within a month of this internship where they were telling me, hey, we help people if they live too long, die too soon, sick or hurt. And I'm kind of rolling my eyes in some of this training, like, okay, this just seems like a good path to make money.
Right.
And within a month or so, I'm seeing these, $500,000, $1 million claims being paid. And I saw the impact that had in my community, and I saw that had the impact it had on the reps. And so that really committed me to the career path when I saw firsthand how people in our role help people at the times they need the most help.
That's a pretty wild scenario. I mean, I was, not to date you, Joe, but I was 11 years old when September 11th happened. So it's a little fuzzy, at that age and trying to think back. But, being in your, late teens, early 20s, whatever you were, you probably vividly remember that. And I'd be curious to know, not that you necessarily have this answer, but, if you would have still been an advisor and stayed on the career path, if you didn't firsthand see that impact. Because as you mentioned before, it was kind of just theories and rainbows and, that type of vibe where it's like, yeah, this is how we help people. And you're like, okay, I don't really see it. But then you actually saw it. I'm sure that drastically increased the likelihood that you were going to not just continue there in the short term, but stay in the field, your whole life. I just wonder what it would have been like, if it wasn't timed out like that.
I think you have experience, David, in the business. And I'm sure a lot of people watching and listening today might be doing this 20 years, but I have a feeling a lot of people might be only doing this for 20 weeks or even 20 months. And I had a mentor who used to tell me, you're not in the business until you pay a claim. And so I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying in that there's a lot of psychic income in our business. And those first year or two are really hard. But having the ability to see that impact of somebody paying a death claim and then seeing the impact that it had on that family, I think definitely heightened and increased my conviction. And it didn't take me a while to recognize the importance of a financial advisor or working with young families at that point.
So then, your intern, that happened. You're like, all right, I'm in, I want to have the same impact on folks. And then you were there for a long time. If I'm not mistaken, you ultimately went from intern to, running your own office. What was that like, running your own office and kind of shifting duties from, being an advisor to then, managing people outside of just clients?
Yeah. So I started as a college intern, and then I went to what's known as a college unit director, which is somebody who wears two hats, running an internship and building a personal practice. Then what I decided to do was become ultimately a field director. And that's where you're talking about, David, in terms of running my own office. So I was with Northwestern a little over 3 years at that point. I was about 25 years old, and I was literally a man on an island. So I grew up in Staten Island. I went to high school in Manhattan. My Northwestern office was about a 50-minute commute to get to every day. But if you know New York and New Jersey, it's not necessarily the minutes of the commute. It's the tolls on the tunnels and the bridges and the turnpikes. So when I started doing some math in that Northwestern Mutual culture, you're very, you're running off a profit loss pretty quickly. So after having a few years of full-time service, achieving $1 million roundtable, starting the CLU path, I approached my managing partner at the time and said, hey, I'm spending, a couple of $100s a week in tolls just to come to the office. The majority of my business is in my hometown of Staten Island and lower Manhattan, because we're calling a lot of financial firms. I think I could make more money and have a bigger impact for you and the firm if we were able to go to Staten Island and open an office. And so he agreed with me. So I looked at a whole bunch of spaces, and I found this one space that was in the front part of a building with an accountant in the back end of the building, and we moved in. It was one room. There was no private offices. One room and had one bathroom, and we put maybe half a dozen cubes in there.
Nice. Now, so you open up that office and things seem to be going, well, right? You're progressing through your career. You're, having a bigger impact. I would presume that you're making more money, along the way as well. But then you had to hit the reset button, 15, 16, years in, and then ultimately you made a change. Talk to me about the change that was made around that inflection point, and then ultimately kind of where you're at today.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different layers to that question. So I'll do the best to address them individually. I think the first was I grew up in Staten Island. I left to go to Villanova. I went back after school. I started a business in the community I grew up in. And so, we had a lot of success. We managed a lot of assets. We had a bunch of advisors, a bunch of new successful advisors. That's a big thing in the Northwestern system under 5 years. And it was just really, humming along. And I'm looking around the landscape. I'm looking around the industry. I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is I want to do when I grow up. I know at that point I'm into the business 15 years. I got, 30, 40 reps. I own one of the buildings my office is in. I got another office. And I'm looking at the system and the model. And I said, this isn't really a fit for what I want to do. And it's really not a fit for what I want my clientele to look like. I think Northwestern does a great job with training. I think they do a great job with products. But I also think when you hit a point in your career where you recognize I want to work with high net worth people, or I want to work with closely held family businesses, you're going to find if you're doing the right job in terms of holistic, comprehensive planning, these big career, whether agencies or wirehouses, aren't necessarily a fit for those individuals. They might get first look because they have a big name. But in terms of servicing and helping the client, everything is a nail when you only have a hammer. And so I started to recognize that for me to have the business and clients that I want, Northwestern Mutual wasn't going to be a fit for me long term anymore, which, David, is a hard pill to swallow when you start there at 21 years old and now you're 35 years old. And this is what you've committed all your time, effort, and energy to.
Well, especially because I know for me, when I transitioned out, one of the biggest things was like all my friends were there, like the guys and gals in the office, they weren't just coworkers, they were like family. So I felt like I was, leaving them as well. So I guess in that transition, what did you do right after? Did you rehang your shingle on a different door, so to speak? Did you take any time in between? Like, what was that transition like, and what sort of model do you operate on now?
So, I'm very appreciative for my time at Northwestern. I'm actually looking at some of the artwork on my wall, when I was on the cover of Columns magazine and they wrote a couple articles. So I really appreciate the time that I spent there. I just think that for the business that I wanted moving forward, it just wasn't going to be the place. So my first stop after Northwestern was AIG Financial Network. Because our Northwestern shop had a very big investment practice and insurance practice, a lot of firms looked at me as somebody who could do something in terms of building that a lot of people couldn't. At that time, going back probably 10 years ago, give or take, a lot of people specialized in insurance or they specialized in investments. It was really kind of like the genesis period, or maybe the tail end of the beginning of everybody becoming comprehensive financial advisors, where everybody was encouraged to get their 7 and their CFP. And so AIG at the time wanted to take their career system into a full financial planning model. So they offered me 8 offices and 150 reps, and I moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was in charge of Charlotte, North Carolina, and a couple of parts of South Carolina for AIG. Now, AIG went through some turmoil. And so in 2016, they terminated their entire career distribution channel. So they fired 2,100 people in about 45 minutes.
Damn.
Exactly.
So the first transition, it was your decision. The second transition, it was not your decision. So what was going through your head at that moment? And like, what did you do immediately after finding that out?
Yeah. So what happened was we were at a meeting in Nashville, Tennessee. At the time, I think there was about 50 managing directors for AIG throughout the country. And human resources come storming in. They're like, hey, everybody's got to see us before you go. We're shutting down your offices right now. Take your files. And so it was a pretty hectic meeting and a pretty hectic time. And so, now I'm in a city I don't know anybody. And the opportunity that I'm there is now closed. So it becomes, okay, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? I thought I just found the model that was going to serve the clients and the reps that I want to work with on a go forward. And that's been completely shut down. So I took that year off of work. In our business, David, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you still won't get everything done. So what I recognized in 2016 after I got back from that meeting in Nashville is I neglected a lot of friends and family for a long time. So what I did there is I just went on a tour and I went to visit my fraternity brothers back in Philadelphia and who moved to Florida and who was in Alabama and who was in Chicago. So I took a lot of time off just visiting friends and family. But simultaneously, what I was doing, David, is I really think that time, maybe a year before, but at that time, I think a lot of these home offices started to really evaluate their models and try to figure out what they were doing. And that's when I recognized that a lot of these shops are broken. And what they did is instead of putting the producer or the client at the center, they were putting corporate profits at the center. And I learned that from going through probably 36 home offices, just talking to national sales directors and regional officers about what their goals are and their compensation plans and the product suites that they have available. So after taking all of 2016 off, that's when I built my model that I have currently in 2017, 2018.
And what is that model currently?
So to your point, I started from scratch again. We take a holistic approach. We focus on clients with insurance, investments, taxes, and legal. Now, we don't do tax returns, right? We don't write wills and trusts, but we take a comprehensive approach where we have alliances and resources that when we present the financial plan to a high net worth individual or a closely held family business, we're going down each one of those cornerstones and making sure that they're fully sound to not only achieve short-term objectives, but long-term plans. So it's completely independent. We have an independent broker dealer. We go direct to carrier on the insurance side, and we live off our own profit loss.
Understood. And as you solo practice, you have a team? If so, what's the team look like? Like, what's the current kind of status of the business in terms of human infrastructure?
Yeah, so it's a couple of different levels to that. And so we have a retail, which brands as New South Wealth Management. And so that will work with clients and business owners, young families, high net worth individuals. We have about 6 full-time advisors and 2 staff people that support that. And then we have a wholesale side of the business that just engages advisors and brokers on sophisticated, complex insurance or investment work, depending on where they need their help.
Understood.
So in some situations, we work direct with client. In other situations, David, we may be the advisor's advisor. What I mean by that is we may have a skill set or an expertise they don't have, whether it's using EST in the investment space or doing an equity split dollar on the insurance side. So maybe like a hired gunslinger might be a way to think of that.
And where is your office located currently?
So we are headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh, you stayed from the AIG days because that's where they brought you down, right?
That's exactly right. And so I stayed in Charlotte, and we have 4 offices throughout the city here. And then we probably have about another 24 advisors that engage us throughout the Southeast, a couple in the Northeast, but that's about the size and scope.
So that's pretty wild to think about. So just to recap for everyone listening, we had someone who started off in an internship program, kind of banging the phones, cold calling, had the courage and the audacity to go to the managing partner at the time and say, obviously it was more eloquent than this, but this makes no economical sense or, any sense at all for me to come into this office based on the fact that my market is back where I'm driving from and it's just costing you money every week. I'm bleeding here, so to speak. And that person, helped in fulfilling your vision of having, an office more local to where you were at. You then built a very large team of advisors that you had the opportunity to coach and support. And, you think about, part of the reason why I like coaching and consulting with advisors is because at Northwestern, I could bring over, 40, 50, 60 clients, a year myself. But when I work with advisors and they're bringing on new clients, the multiplier effect takes over and it just kind of expands the impact. So I can't even imagine how many folks, in terms of clients you've had an impact on both personally and through the guys and gals that you spent time developing. So that's really cool. And then you decided to leave there. You then got an opportunity with, I think you said, 8 different offices with AIG. So again, think about the impact that you were having on, helping run and lead those. that got, taken out from under you. And then you just did it all over again, right? You built a business. I think you said what, in 2017 you started it because you took
That's
2016
right.
off. So you fast forward 5 years. I mean, you're basically averaging a new office every year when you think about it like that. Yeah, that's pretty badass. And I'm sure that the second transition was probably more trying than the first transition, because the first transition was your choice. The second transition was a surprise. So I guess, hit on like the mental aspect of that the second time around. Like, how did you maintain your resiliency in doing it all over again?
David, I think that's a good question. And sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug. And I think what keeps me going is the work we do for people, and what's exciting about the entrepreneurial experience of this is that the business is shrinking. So you have a consumer base that's growing in wealth. You have a consumer base that's growing in size, but in terms of people that are able to help them and support them is shrinking. And so to your point earlier, is that when you're standing at the bottom at the hill looking at the top again, you're like, oh, wow, that's a long climb I got to do again. But when you start looking at, wow, I'm building this for myself. It's not the Northwestern brand. It's not the AIG brand. I own this company. I own the relationships with this company, and you start doing it for yourself. That gives you a little bit more encouragement. And then all of a sudden you start looking at the clients and you're like, I couldn't even help them with this area 5 or 10 years ago. These products didn't even exist. And some advisors don't even have access to them 4 or 5 years ago. So, when you see the opportunity from an entrepreneur standpoint, in that there's more people with more money that need more help, and there's less people that are able to do it, that's exciting. But I think ultimately, when you're sitting across the table from whether they're your friends or a local business that you look up to, or a high net worth person that you met through your high school alumni network, and you're able to help them with things that you didn't even know were possible, that's really invigorating and keeps you refocused, and it keeps you wanting to go out there and building your practice and build your business. So I'm actually the most excited I've ever been, even though we're probably in the toughest economic climate I've been since the .com.
Yeah, it's actually a good segue to one of the topics that I teed up at the beginning, which is just the impact that our business has on people, both personally and economically, and then how advisors can actually focus on doing that. Because I think it's different to, hey, I manage their assets and I mitigated some risk for them, and I meet with them once a year. There's a difference between that and being able to truly say, like, I have had an impact on this person, this family, this business. And I know that for me, when I was an advisor, there were plenty of times, as I'm sure there has been with you, as I'm sure there is with the folks who are listening, where you kind of stop and think and you're like, what am I doing? Like, what is all this for? So I don't know how you want to kind of riff on that topic, Joe. I don't know if you want to share kind of examples or tactics and strategies, to really emphasize on the impact that you're having on folks. So I'm just going to kind of leave it open-ended, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions, but, curious to know, how you put that into practice.
David, I agree with a lot of what you said. The way a lot of people enter the business, it's usually through a large institution. And when you go into those large institutions, it becomes about hitting these benchmarks that are arbitrary, right? You had no input in them. Probably the person holding you accountable had no input in them, right?
Sure.
At the end of the day, it's you got to make this amount of calls, or you got to see these amount of people, or you got to get these amount of referrals. I agree with a lot of what you said. And I think that's why so many people get discouraged in their first year, second year, third year, because they get into the business for the income. They get into the business for the independence. They get into the business for the impact. And here they are working their butt off for, 6 months, 12 months, 14 months, and they have no income. They're a slave to the office, right? And they haven't really helped anybody. And so I agree with what you said when we first started talking about my 9/11 experience. I got to see the answers to the test, right? And it was a lot easier for me to make a call. It was a lot easier for me to keep a meeting knowing that I could not only financially benefit, but this family will benefit more from the work that I do. That's something that gets lost, and especially when you're dealing with younger advisors, is it becomes about this benchmark. It becomes about this piece of activity. It becomes about, making the pain stop, whether it's the constant call from your manager or the, lack of income in your paycheck. And it gets away from trying to help people. And so what I always tell people is if you're having a tough day or a tough week, go spend some time with your family. And if you don't like your family, go spend some time with your friend's family that you do like, because that's really what it's all about. It's about spending time with your friends and spending time with your family. And this business gives you the opportunity to make the income in the time frame that you're willing to commit. So if you're asking me, hey, Joe, how can you help people stay committed and refocused? I would say spend time with the people that you care the most about. If you're losing time and you're losing focus, I'd say spend some more time with the people that you care about. Because once you kind of have your batteries charged and you recognize what's important to you and you're focused, there's no better the business than this. It's really, David, as you know, coaching advisors, having been an advisor yourself, if you can really get through those first 5 years, if you can really get through those first 5 years, and those first 5 years are kind of like pledging a fraternity, I say, right? It's the best time of your life you never want to do again, right? If you can get through those first 5 years and you set up your business right, you will actually make more money and work less hours over time. And there's no business in America that calls for that. Every other business, you're going to have to either make more time for it, or you will not be in a position where you can work less hours and make more money.
It's interesting, bringing up the making sure to pay attention to family and friends. So I developed this list, and I've talked about it on other podcasts, but it's relevant here. It's called the C3 list, and the three C's are commitment, consistency, and confidence. So basically, when you commit to something and you're consistent with that something, ultimately it breeds confidence in you. And confidence is, as I'm sure you would agree, is foundational to being successful, be it here or somewhere else. And there's 5 things that you do every single day that in turn fall under 3 categories. So it's 2 things that move your business forward every day. It's 2 things that move you as a human forward every day. And then it's 1 thing that moves others forward every day. And they're 100% in your control. So as an example, for professional, it's asking for referrals a certain amount of times, not getting a certain amount of referrals, right? It's things that you can control. Personally, maybe it's reading 10 pages of a book, or, actually getting up when your alarm goes off and not hitting snooze. Maybe it's, working out for a certain amount of time. Again, 100% in your control, and being of service to others. It could be spending an hour with your spouse or your kid with the phones aside, just like an intimate hour together. It could be calling 2 friends just to catch up and see how they're doing. It could even be putting away an extra grocery cart, when you go to the grocery store that's out in the parking lot. They don't need to be groundbreaking things. But what I found, when I was earlier in my career, is that there were times where, I was making good money, but I wasn't feeling healthy, or I was disengaged with family or friends because I was so focused on work and I just felt off. And then there were times where I felt healthy. I was spending a good amount of time with my friends and family, but I wasn't making a ton of money and I felt off. And there were times where I was feeling good, personally and professionally, but I wasn't, spending time with my friends and family, being intentional about that. And I felt off. So this is a process in a way that every single day you can move all 3 areas of your life forward, be it for yourself, for your business, and for the people around you. Obviously, I'm biased, but what I like about it is rather than getting to a point where you're like, okay, I need to drop everything and go hang out with friends and family, it's like you get little doses of it every single day. And what I've found since implementing it is it keeps me more even keel, as opposed to experiencing the ebbs and flows, and the emotions of living and running a business and trying to keep everyone happy. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's kind of how I would think through, rather than like a balanced life, it's more of like a blended life to keep you going for longer.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you said there, David. I think more people hear that and need to hear that message. What gets scheduled gets done, right? And so I think when you're intentional with your priorities, you're more likely to achieve them. It's a blending, not a balance.
For sure. Now, one of the last things I want to unpack today is we had talked when we had our intro call before the show, and we just talked about how anyone, could really be an advisor. Obviously, somewhat of a general statement, but the idea is that oftentimes, be it, the insurance type of companies or the wire houses, a very specific type of person, will excel there. And for those people, it's an excellent platform to build a business on, assuming that it continues to be a fit for them. But as we had discussed, like there's often times where people don't necessarily want to, make 40, 50 phone calls, 100 phone calls a day. They don't necessarily want to ask for referrals every single day, but they love the industry from a planning standpoint and they could develop business. They just need to do it in their own way. And we put together a personality assessment called Advisor DNA. And you're basically spit out as one of four different personalities in our industry. And you can deduce these personalities just when I say the name, having been in the business as long as you have. And it's the idea that you come out as either a connector, a rainmaker, a guardian, or an architect. And typically, the connectors and the rainmakers are the ones that they'll excel on those platforms. If you're a guardian or an architect, it doesn't mean you're a bad advisor, but it's probably not the right platform for you, right? It's not the right model. And it's our belief that any of those personalities ultimately can produce business. They just need to do so in a way that fits them and their personality and the way they want to interact with clients. So talk to me about your thoughts. I just wanted to kind of help set the stage, but talk to me about your thoughts as it relates to what sort of platforms maybe you think certain types of people can excel at, why you think they should go to a Northwestern or Merrill Lynch style, or maybe why they shouldn't. Let's just kind of riff on that for a bit.
Yeah, I think your personality assessment sounds fantastic. And I wish more firms would embrace your philosophy and add a science to the interviewing part, because there is so much need for the work that we do. And there's so much demand for a high quality talent. I think the struggles become, David, that a lot of people don't know where to put the people anymore. And what I mean by that is a lot of these home offices are filled with people in the wrong roles and positions. And so what's happening is they're making impact on the field by giving advice that they don't really understand. And so, a lot of people are the mindset, oh, if I read a book or if I sit with this person and have lunch with them once or twice a year, I'm going to understand what's going on with an advisor in the field. So I think the most important thing, David, is exactly what you said. I think an individual has to understand the science of who they are and then operate day in and day out that's consistent in a way to get the results that they want to get. I personally think any person that puts their mind to being a financial advisor will be successful. I've never met anybody that saw three people face to face every single day fell out of being an advisor. Having said that, not everybody wants to be an advisor. So to your point, we have to break this Peter principle, right? You do a really good job, you get promoted. You do a really good job, you get promoted. You do really bad at a job, you stay in that role. And I think your personality assessment is probably the first step in breaking that Peter principle. So I think once somebody understands who they are, the science of who they are, then they can align their day-to-day activity and a lot of their roles and responsibilities to achieve the goals that they want.
And it's interesting. You bring up the 3 people a day, and I 100% agree that the more people you see consistently, the more likely you are to succeed. And it's so interesting, when I started working in more of the RIA space and meeting advisors and working with firms. And, mind you, right, coming from Northwestern where it was like, you were no one unless you brought on 60 plus, new clients a year, right? And then I'm, meeting with these folks and I'm like, so, what are you looking to accomplish this year? And they're like, I want to bring on, 10 new clients. And at first I was like, what? What are you talking about? Like, why just 10? And then I realized that the 10 new clients that they're bringing on have between $2 to $4 million each. And then I start doing kind of the back of the napkin approach. And I'm like, oh, wow. So every year you're adding about $200,000 to $400,000 of revenue to the firm. I share that because to the point that we're trying to make, there's multiple different paths to success. You can have a high volume practice. You can have a lower volume, higher net worth kind of practice as it relates to the clients that you're working with. Like I think of someone like Aaron Miller, which is, how we met. His personal business doubled when he became a managing director, and he did so on half the time. And it was just because it forced him to be way more efficient and meet with way better people. It's almost like a, choose your own journey type of thing. So I think, the point that we're trying to hit on with both of our comments is you can be successful. You just need to figure out like what is the path that is best for you, and then put your head down and execute, or find help from someone to help execute that plan. But just because you weren't successful, quote unquote, in a particular model doesn't mean that you need to, transition over to software sales or, something else. It's funny, a lot of folks, when they left Northwestern, they'd go to software sales and absolutely murder it over there. So that's why that came to mind. But you can still be an advisor. It's just, maybe a different model is better suited.
Yeah, I agree a lot of what you said there, David. I don't know what happened with COVID, but they want to tell people what they can't do, right? More than encourage and empower them to help them do what they want to do. I just think, our business is the last business that anybody could be successful. You just need a little bit of the right mentorship and then a lot of daily execution.
100%. Well, Joe, this has been great. And it's also so cool to see you can, stop and start. You're now on your third go around. And if anything, you're getting, bigger and better and on a higher trajectory. And it goes to show that you were in a model that wasn't a fit, but you still made the most of it. And then you were in another model that you thought was a fit. You made the most of it, and that was kind of taken away. And now you're building your own model, so it's cool. So for everyone listening, I share this from one of the podcasts that I listen to a lot is Andy Frisella's Real AF podcast. And one of the things that he says time and time again is, especially like younger kids who are, looking at their first job, he's like, go work at McDonald's and be the best worker at McDonald's. Like make the burgers delicious, right? Do everything to a T, because the habits that you create in that model is going to translate to whatever else you progress to next. So if you're at a company that maybe isn't the right platform, continue to do your best to excel and give it your all, because otherwise you're building bad habits, and then you need to unravel those habits when you do find a better platform. And you don't just necessarily, snap your fingers and all of a sudden you're going to, work hard and be effective. Like you need to make the most of it with what you got. So if you're in a platform that you don't know that it's the right one for you, that doesn't mean to, just go through the motions. Like work your butt off and make the most of it until you find that next opportunity. Joe, with that being said, one of the ways that we try to add more value to the folks listening is to try and distill a reading list for everyone. And I know the book that you had mentioned, which I actually haven't read. A lot of times, guests will share books and I'm like, oh yeah, I read that one. That's cool. But I haven't read this one. So I'm curious. It's called, I believe, Leadership and Self-Deception.
That's right.
Why'd you pick that book?
It's probably the most impactful book I've read in my career. I used to keep a book with me, and whenever I had an appointment show up late or if I was early, I would read it. And I had a client tell me one time, like, you should read this book. You're in charge of a lot of people and you're looking to grow. And so I trusted him at the time, and I picked up a copy. And it's one of those books that you'll reread. I don't want to say every year, but you'll probably reread it, every other year, maybe every third year at a most. But it forces you to take a hard look at who you are personally and professionally, and then make the adjustments that you want to see. And it does it in a very subtle way through a story. And through the story, you're able to relate a lot of commonality, especially if you're in our business.
Yeah, I got it up here. I'll scoop up a copy. I don't know how related it would be, but it's about leadership. Have you yet read the book, The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink?
No, I haven't.
That's a really, really good book. Jocko, I don't know if you've come across any of his content, former Navy SEAL, but that book is really good, as well as his other book, Leadership Strategies and Tactics, I believe is what it's called. So if you want a break from reading the same book every so often, feel free to scoop up one of those.
No, I'll definitely check it out. I trust you, so I'll definitely take a look at it. The dichotomy of leadership.
Yes. But yeah, this has been great. And if there's anyone who wants to connect with you or, get together in some way, shape, or form, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think the LinkedIn has always been a great place to find and connect with people. All my contact information is on our website, newsouthwealth.com. And I'd be happy to help, whether it's an advisor or a client in any way. I believe in our business and I believe the best days are ahead of us.
Awesome. Joe, appreciate you joining the show and looking forward to spending some more time together moving forward.
Sounds great, David. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care.